Hi, guys.
Hey, good to see you again.
All right.
So, Nick, you're not in the country anymore. You're with Civilization. Looks like you're in a nice apartment.
Yeah.
Which city are you in?
I'm in the United States, and
Okay.
I'm in Washington D.C., where my wife and I reside.
Fantastic.
And this is my studio. We have a place down the street where we live, and this is kind of like my creative space.
Oh, it's fantastic.
Nice.
So now tell us a little bit about Echo and where Echo resides. Does Echo reside in DC or in New York, or what is it?
So ECHO is the acronym for East Coast Chamber Orchestra, and we are kind of everywhere along the East Coast, really. I don't think there's any of us currently south of Washington D.C. It's pretty much far up as Boston for now, and then some people come from the West Coast too. But so ECHO is really just a collective of friends, really, from a long time. I mean, we all came together after we were graduating around the same time back in 2000, 2001. And it was, the concept of Echo is nothing new. And David, I'm sorry to say this in front of you, but we do not have a conductor.
I was going to say, I'm not actually very interested in this.
So Nick, how is the group presented? Is it small chamber ensembles and chamber orchestra, or in between?
Yeah, we've sort of kind of like the way we financially can operate. I mean, we're the most organized, disorganized group of musicians. I mean, we don't have a board. We just basically are volunteering our time. And the way we're financially able to operate is 18 musicians on stage at one time. So sometimes we've done stuff with woodwinds. We've obviously had soloists in the past, which include ourselves. And it's, everything from the standard repertoire, but the thing that interests us the most is actually commissioning composers to write for this kind of band, for this kind of ensemble, and not in the traditional sense, really using a lot of extended technique, make the string choir come to life in a way that you've never heard it. And, with the forces that we have, these are all extraordinary musicians, chamber musicians, and soloists and virtuosos. So it's really been fun to see a composer kind of realize and really be able to go quite far as what they're able to put in front of us to do.
Do you have composers that will actually engineer the piece for an ensemble that does not have a conductor?
Yeah.
So I always wonder why that doesn't happen more.
Yeah, and talking to you, Brett, you understand this. It's like when you have a group that you have in mind and you understand their ability and the way they communicate, it's fun to kind of write for that specific ensemble.
Right. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And I think for us, it's also to expand the horizon for the repertoire of this kind of configuration. It's kind of like, traditionally speaking, there's only the famous war horses, Tchaikovsky, Dvorak, Suk, that kind of get tired of, we get tired of playing those over and over again. So, yeah.
David, I don't think I told you, but Don Foster and I and a group of us had a conductorless chamber orchestra in L.A. back in the day. Yeah. Exactly like this. And then we couldn't hold it together. We couldn't run the organization. But
it's tricky. My first enterprise as a conductor was to start a chamber orchestra called the Academy of St. John in the Wilderness. I was in Denver at the time.
I like that name.
And it created a lot of confusion when we had concerts played on the radio because of the Academy of St. Martin in the Fields, which was intentional, purely intentional.
Was it a coincidence?
That's where I learned everything. That's where I learned how to get people together, how to pay them, how to move music stands, and how to start a board, and how to be self-sustaining, how to raise money. It was an incredible proving ground for me, and it was exhausting. So, anybody who's trying to do this on a sort of ad hoc basis has really got their work cut out for them. It's very difficult.
Can you guys tell the story of how you met?
Gorgeous place.
I want to hear the backstory.
Well, we met a long time ago.
Yeah, so David, you should tell the story. Or I can tell it, but you should tell it.
Well, I'll just start by saying I lived in Colorado for 11 years, just after I graduated from school. and played in the Denver Symphony. And then I took up conducting. And one of my first jobs as the assistant conductor of the Denver Symphony was a kind of a combination conducting the youth orchestra in Denver, the Denver Young Artists Orchestra. And so you can take it from there.
And I lived in Boulder, Colorado for, well, in completion about 3 or 4 years in 2 different times. And actually I started violin, my first official lesson was with a Suzuki teacher in Longmont, Colorado, which is kind of equidistant between Boulder, where I lived, and Denver, where I would take my lessons, and also at her house, which was in Longmont. But
what was her name again?
Her name is Ellie Albers.
Oh, of course. Oh my goodness. Well, Julie was the youngest cellist ever to be in the Denver Young Artists Orchestra, and you were probably the youngest violinist to be in it too.
So there's a great picture that ever since David and I, so it's, I don't know, it was like 20 years or no, longer, almost 30 years probably, until you and I started working professionally again.
Yeah.
And so I had discovered this picture of Maestro Lockington and me kind of like this little, didn't know up from down, but I did know how to go up. I knew that up bow comes after down bow, and I knew how to play third position. So, I was doing all right. But
what more do you need?
That's all you need. And then, but that's how David and I know each other, and it's been so wonderful to work as colleagues now, and we go back a long ways.
Tell us then about Time for Three and anything else you want to tell us about.
Yeah. So I went to the Curtis Institute of Music, and I had a wonderful, amazing teacher there, Viktor Denchenko, who was one of the most, I guess, well-known pupils of Oistrakh, David Oistrakh. So for me, it was incredible, kind of like 1 degree of separation from one of the gods of violin, and the Russian style. And of course, at Curtis, we're very lucky. We also have lessons and coachings with pretty much every teacher and on faculty and guest faculty that come in. But my life as a soloist coming out of Curtis, my headspace was really different. I wasn't really sure of myself. I wasn't sure of what I wanted. I didn't know if I really enjoyed playing solo. And it was just this time in my life that I was trying to figure things out. I'd had all these amazing experiences. I loved being at school. I loved the orchestra. I loved chamber music. And at the same time, I was also doing all this wild experimentations. I'd had this hip-hop trash can drumming group that'd play on the streets of Philadelphia, and even in high school, I grew up in Washington, D.C., and in Maryland, outside of Washington, D.C., and I used to busk on the street corners with my high school buddies. And at Curtis, I kind of had these 2 lives partitioned, separated from each other, right? And after Curtis, I won YCA, Young Concert Artist, and I started doing these orchestral solo dates, and I wasn't feeling it really. And however, I was really feeling it when I would have these jam sessions at clubs or with my friends with, all these different instruments. And this was sort of simultaneously happening. I met the other guys in Time for Three, and we would have these jam sessions while we were at Curtis. And right after we graduated Curtis, we were sort of doing that. And we weren't making our daily bread that way, but it was still an opportunity to really experiment. And I remember this really kind of key moment where my friend Danny Lee, who is now the principal cellist of the St. Louis Symphony, he and I were like always hanging out. And during one summer, he heard me play a club date at a local club in Philly. And then the next morning, I wanted to run through Tchaikovsky Violin Concerto because I was going to audition for a conductor. And so, he we went up to Curtis, and I played through the first movement of Tchaikovsky and was feeling really good about myself. I felt like I was really saying everything I wanted to. But after the first movement, and the first movement, of course, is mammoth. It's like a symphony in itself, right? So the first movement ends, and I look at him, and he's like had this perplexed, stoic, expression. I was like, dude, what? He's like, man, last night you were so expressive when you played. Obviously, it's not technically like Tchaikovsky, but the violin was sort of hanging off your chin and your shoulder, and the violin was kind of like this conduit to your expression. And now it's like you're playing at the violin, and sort of like this. You're playing notes, and you're playing with huge amount of intensity, but there's no. It's musical, but there's no there's no personalization to it.
You weren't coming through.
Yeah, and so that was the first moment that I remember. I'm sure there was many moments, but that was the first moment where I was just like, what am I doing? And that led into really Time for Three, and then Time for Three did really well. We're very lucky. We had one of the first big things we did was a commission from the Philadelphia Orchestra. Christoph Eschenbach commissioned Jennifer Higdon to write us a concerto, because probably he recognized that we were experimenting, doing these folk things and just kind of making up simple tunes, but we weren't really. He probably saw that in the hands of a great master composer, a lot of what we can do could probably be deeply expressed and through a real composition. And that was a big moment for Time for Three, and that whole moment with that group changed my perspective as an artist altogether.
Nick,
long answer.
I hear this story often, and do you think the conservatory model could adjust to accommodate? Like, I hear that people always have to leave, kind of go outside of the conservatory to find themselves in some way, like the story you're telling. Why doesn't the conservatory model pick up on that and include that in the curriculum?
I think it's a great question, and I think it's a debate that should always be a struggle to figure out. Because after being on this side of Curtis, after graduating, I feel like the reason why I can do what I do now, which is, so now when I play solo, I feel I'm using every bit of the experience of a group like Time for Three or Improvisation, just playing all sorts of genres. But none of this freedom would have happened without my deep dive into the stuff that doesn't come easy to me and that has many layers, which is the masterworks. So this is a huge thing. So I don't know, it was after the 2008 financial crisis, where every institution was figuring out how to recover, like we're going to have to do during this crazy time. I think the idea that Curtis came up with is really wonderful, whereas there's this postgraduate kind of time that is there's a scholarship program for that, and you have to apply for that. And I like that idea, because it's like when the younger students are doing their thing, they can kind of see through the window of the future of what this experimentation is happening, so they can get their own ideas, but they have to do the work. And it's a wonderful concept, and the program has been very successful. You see artists that have gone into the healthcare, have programs that they've done with health, mental health, and medical health, and music tied together, environmental endeavors. It's just really cool stuff that's going on. And Time for Three, we were kind of ahead of that, doing it in our own ways, piecemealing things together, just figuring it out. But definitely we are one of the examples of how that kind of can work.
Do you think that almost anybody could learn to be able to do something that is sort of outside a classical genre if that isn't really in their blood?
I think everybody can learn
about
it. I mean, I believe, kind of on a fundamental level, if you know how to communicate and you're able to communicate with somebody else, you're using the same tools of improvisation, riffing, that you do in music. The only difference with me speaking and me playing the violin is that I spent many thousands of hours speaking than I do on the instrument, although I spend a lot of time on my instrument. And that's what I say to young students who, see improvisation as like a disease,
It's a bit like hang gliding, which I've never done, although I did do a bungee jump once, but when you can imagine running towards the edge of a cliff, and then there's a point where it takes you up, and the times that I've improvised, which isn't that many, but some of the most fun ones I've done with you, Nick, it feels like there's a moment where you're just jumping off the cliff into the wind. You have no idea if you're going to crash and burn in 2 seconds or in 10 minutes, but it's pretty thrilling, I have to say. And I, just like you, I found it instructive that it helps the music that I make that's notated, that's hopefully, almost memorized or something. Well, I want to ask you about your singing, because that's
what I wanted to ask too.
You didn't study that at Curtis.
Well, I mean, you solfege, man.
You did solfege? Did you develop your voice at Curtis? Because, you sing in a popular kind of idiom, but you've got to be able to sing in tune, and got to be able to adjust the volume and all the rest of it, and you've got to blend with your guys.
In pretty much all my school years at the Washington Waldorf School, actually in all Waldorf schools, I went to many Waldorf schools in the United States. It's a private school system, and singing is very much part of the curriculum. Everybody's in chorus.
Sung. Yeah.
Say it again?
So you've always sung?
I've always sung. And
fantastic.
And in harmony, and I always loved singing the tenor part. The juiciest, Brett, you're a violist, viola line most often can change the direction of a harmony or a leading tone, or just
most
juiciest
often.
inner voices.
Oh, okay. So Nick, I want to know something, because you're kind of this holistic, total artist, but what makes someone like you, where did that curiosity come from? Because so many people would have just gone to Curtis and just played Brahms and just done their thing. What is it that gave you kind of that creative permission to just follow whatever you wanted to do fearlessly? Can you pinpoint it?
Yeah, I mean, I've people ask me that often, and really, I think it's just a combination of who I am as a person. As a kid, I was my parents' worst nightmare, because I was, first of all, rebelling all the time, but always, I had a ton of energy, and I was very social, but it was kind of those attributes of myself. But then, I went through the Suzuki method, and my grandfather was one of the pioneers of the Suzuki method for the first time from Japan to the United States, and then consequently the rest of the world, John Kendall. And I always saw first of all, I always would see my grandfather in these massive group classes, making children play exactly as he wanted, but making them smile, laugh, and completely in his control. And the thing that I loved about that is music. The activity of playing the violin was fun and games, and imagination, immense amount of imagination, but curated with this immense amount of discipline, because I wasn't allowed to do any of the games until I could play in tune, and until I play well and with good articulation. Is the bow straight? Witches dance. Witches dance is one of the fun, at least in my memory. And I couldn't, the witches dance. And so in group class on every, we would have group class every Saturday. And I wasn't, until the way group class is you have these play downs. So at the beginning of the group class, if you don't know the song yet, you have to sit there and watch the older students play the repertoire until it gets to your book, until it gets to your song. So you get to see the advanced stuff happening. Of course, it's a great way for a young person, especially for me. It's like, I can't wait to do that. So I have to work hard. It's wonderful. And for witches dance, I used to see the older kids, and then pitzing and kicking. I mean, my gosh, that's so naughty, you know? It was just like, cool. But I wasn't allowed to do that until I go, I mean, there's so much for a young kid that to make that sound good, yeah? So I had to really, you know, and then if I did that well, then I could do the dance. And man, so as you could tell for me, playing music was always far beyond playing the violin. The violin was merely the conduit for the expressive enjoyment and all this. And so that I think was the center of everything, and everything else just kind of happened, but based around that concept of freedom coming from discipline. And you know, so growing up in Washington, you know, in Maryland, but close to Washington D.C., great on Sundays. It was a great bluegrass program on the local NPR station, which was my first kind of real introduction to the violin sounding so fun and, you know, carefree. My uncle gave me, when I was really young, gave me Stefan Grappelli and Yehudi Menuhin's duo album on compact disc. The album called Jealousy, just amazing to hear that. And then, you know, in high school, I was into urban music and the grunge scene. So, and in Washington, D.C., there's a great culture called go-go music, which is African rhythms with hip-hop and jazz and gospel. And I would play gigs at the gospel churches in Northeast and Southwest DC. I mean, I had all these incredible experiences, all the while having my weekly lessons. And I also, because of my grandfather kind of overseeing me, he knew that I needed focus on also scales and arpeggios. So I had two teachers actually, which was wonderful.
You know what I'd like to talk about now is the piece that David, you wrote for the two of you. The duet. That was so fantastic. The one that's from where you quote Prokofiev Third Piano Concerto.
Yeah, well, that's part of the reason we had such a good time that week just earlier on in the year, because we had to put this piece together really quickly. In fact, but the piece started as a commission at the Pasadena Symphony Gala in September, and I was auctioned off to write a piece for Valentine's Day. And so Bryan and Alec, they bought me, and I knew that they loved Prokofiev's Third Piano Concerto and a particular melody, so I sort of geared all the melodic material around a big climax that was going to be this melody from the third movement of the piano concerto. I also knew that they had a pretty fabulous car collection, so I thought I'd make it an adventure piece. So it had the bum 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 rhythm, and all the time I'm writing this, I'm thinking, what would be fun for Nick to play? Because he was going to premiere it with me at their house. We actually will play a recording of that at the end of this, but it was so much fun to throw this together. Yeah. It was just a blast. And then we sort of dared ourselves to do it as an encore at the evening performance. And that was a whole other level of drama too. It was great.
It was amazing.
It really was amazing.
It was so fun and you know, I really felt I'm lucky in my experience in Time for Three. I know what it's like to have somebody write something with you in mind, and with David, I could tell that he had me in mind. It was perfect, and it was really fun.
It was great fun, and it's called Bryan and Alec Take Sergei for a Spin. Sergei Prokofiev, some fancy car.
But David, we should talk for a second about your just selfless, amazing mentoring heart. You're very special with that. It's rare, right, Nick? Would you agree?
Fully agree.
Very rare.
Well,
that's all
my
I'm
dad,
saying.
the very prosaic but touching eulogy the minister gave at my dad's funeral said, Hugh was an encourager. And I mean, it was, that's what he was. My dad was, he was always there to say, yeah, you can do it. Why not? That sounds like a great idea. And I got this sense, just as you did, Nick, with your grandfather, I got this sense of music as community from my dad. Mm-hmm. And so I've always felt that music is a vehicle. And the pieces that I write, my conducting, my playing, it's all a part of a terrain that to me is just endlessly fascinating to investigate and walk over and play in. I don't feel like, I mean, it's just playtime. How lucky are we? I mean, you're finishing your piece, Brett. You're writing with your dudes for Time for Three. I'm doing very little.
No, you are not. I've seen what you're doing.
But we are so incredibly lucky. Absolutely. Mm-hmm. So, Nick, what's it like to be a rock star? I mean, you're not just a great musician. You're kind of a rock star. I mean, I've noticed this. You play in stadiums in Europe. No. Do you play in stadiums in America too?
No. Well, no. Sorry. Yes. Well, Time for Three. We've played the national anthem for 2 NFL football games.
Yeah.
And an NBA game. I'm trying to think if we've done anything else, but there's at least 3 right now in the States, and then you're referring to this gigantic tour that Time for Three did all across Germany and some cities in the Netherlands. I mean, it was just this massive tour. It's called Night of the Proms, which of course is an offshoot of Night of the Proms, which is at Royal Albert Hall in London. This is different than that. But it's this tour with this big orchestra and with big stars. We were on stage with Shaka Khan and Ronan Keating, Natasha Bedingfield, with Stephanie Heinzman. These are all like big names. And we were kind of like the classical crossover kind of offering.
Yeah.
And it was extraordinary. It was a lot of fun. It was an amazing experience to be part of that. It's literally being part of a city that travels everywhere. They had 23 tractor trailer trucks, 300 crews. They had a whole kitchen, and the chefs would come with us, and I mean, it was extraordinary. It was one big family for about a month and a half, but in no shape, there's no illusion that I do not think of myself as a rock star at all. I mean, that was just a once in a lifetime kind of thing. That was a lot of fun to do. I mean, there's nothing like playing for that many people. I mean, we were playing for 40 or 50,000 people at one time.
I wanted to ask you too, and how you guys build a song in your group.
Yeah, many different ways to do that. It's so many different ways. I mean, sometimes it's one of us will come up with an inspirational thought. Like, for example, the other night I was outside at this farm I was staying at, and I had this, I was writing till really late, and it was like 1 o'clock in the morning. My wife went to bed, and I went outside and just kind of stared up at the moon and the stars. And so, I think everybody has this moment in their life where they're kind of looking up, and it's just this feeling of how inconsequential you are to the vastness that's out there. And but yet it also makes you treasure being alive. And then these feelings that, the reality of today, where so easily we are brought to our knees as a people, and kind of highlighting how vulnerable we are as a people, because, you know, at least for me and in my world, I think for all of us professionally, we're just, you know, so fraught with not enough time for things, and we're so connected to this web of, you know, like the frenzy of everyday life is like our enemy, you know. It's like, it's just so speed and quality is sometimes just thrown out over just getting it done.
Right.
And so it's just all these feelings I had, and I shared that with the guys, you know, this moment of introspection, and we just started riffing, you know, like. And then, you know, the other guy would go. So you had, and then Renan would play these.
So you just
tense.
Build it right up.
What is that sound?
It's just so loud here today.
Well, we're going to start to wind this down, and thought we might go out with a little bit of the piece that I wrote for the two of us, for Bryan and Alec. Bryan and Alec.
We love you.
Take Sergey for a spin. So thanks, Nick, for being with us.
Thank you guys so much, and hope to see everybody again on the other side of this. Stay well, wash your hands.
Yeah, thanks,
right.
Nick.